Welcome to Green and Gold FC.
And the puck's home by Tim Cahill. Australia have done it.
Could write the Matildas into history. Cue the party.
The best team of the A-League era. And it goes. Tyler! It's a save that means the world to Australia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green and Gold FC podcast by the fans for the fans. We've got another great episode lined up for you today, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I'm Neil Simons, NPL Victoria commentate, just broadcaster in general, and do some stuff for Hakoa Sydney City. I'm joined by Alex and Graham. Alex, how is it going, mate?
I'm going absolutely brilliantly, mate. I've just gotten back from work. I'm absolutely exhausted. And the boys said, hop on, we need you on the pod. And I said, you know what? I've got nothing better to do with my afternoon. So here we are for episode 4, I believe.
Yes, episode 4. We had a fantastic discussion last week, which we'll get into. But before we do that, Graham, how are we going?
I'm doing reasonably well. The Brisbane Roar game was at a terrible time zone for me, so I was happy to miss that because it was, in the end, it was pretty dreadful. But probably I'm not the only one to be disappointed this weekend. I won't mention Ollie Sale this podcast.
No, not at all.
Let's not get into this, please. No.
Rightio. Our most recent podcast was with two of soccer Twitter's most infamous individuals, SMFC Pete and SMFC Mike. Boys, thoughts on the episode? I personally had a great time listening to it. I've spoken to Mike many times over the years, and I've seen him at several South Melbourne games over the last 12 months or so. And it was very much sort of attuned to what I've heard in person from him. Your thoughts, boys?
I mean, infamous is definitely a word to describe him. I'd say that much. But look, honestly, it took me until the filming of that episode and me trying to tag Mike and Pete on Twitter to figure out that Pete's actually had me blocked on Twitter for a while, but that's all sorted now. We're all good. There's no harm done. But no, one of the main things that I saw on Twitter from people that actually listened to the episode was, wow, I'm surprised at how normal they sound compared to when they're talking on Twitter. And I'd have to say, I share a similar sentiment. Look, after speaking with them both, they're both great guys. They have a great knowledge of, NPL Victoria and Victorian football in general. And it was great to sort of pick their brains on a lot of stuff regarding the old NSL.
Brilliant. And Graham, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was just really expecting a lot more fireworks like their Twitter. They're just great guys. They want what's best for the game. And I was expecting to agree with a lot, but there seems to be very little to pick apart there. I mean, I'm sure if we went into the nitty-gritty, tiny little details about what's the best exact format for the future of football, there'll be some differences. But the big picture, yeah, we very, very similar. I think one thing that stood out for me was I come from a regional area. I come from Cairns, and someone in the forum also came from a regional area and had very similar thoughts to me, where you just don't know about all this history until the A-League comes on. I certainly didn't. And it can easily feel like everything's against football, and you're becoming a football fan. And then you hear these people, they're saying death to the A-League and this is just terrible. And, they're like talking about how bad the Socceroos are and all that. And it can feel like, oh, this is just another voice. And in fact, it's coming from other football fans. And that can really, really shock you. But I think it's like really good to just take a moment to listen and just say, okay, where does this come from? And really, really learn. And I think it's really important that we learn from our most passionate football fans. And one thing which is so tragic about the last 20 years is we've basically alienated some of our most passionate football fans and by alienating our historic clubs. A complete mess going forward and trying to fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've sort of come from a very unique perspective. I think most people would know me from my days when I was at Kick 360, sort of running the operation there. And that was obviously very much an A-League focus. All our journalists had accreditation and we were very much involved in the A-League as a whole. And so at that time, I was dipping my toes into the NPL Victoria a little bit. And to sort of just see how that's evolved from my perspective and my whole worldview, and you speak to people who have these different perspectives on professional football in this country, then sort of what happened to the APL and obviously the various events that occurred over the last 2 to 3 years, you sort of take a step back and see, I can see why these people are disenfranchised a little bit. There is this lack of authenticity in some areas of the professional game and in the top tier of Australia. You can get that feeling, and it's present to an extent. So I think from Mike and Pete's perspective, I think Mike is a fantastic man. Shout out to Mike. He's an incredible person every time I met him, and see him around Eastern Lions sometimes as well. So I think these guys just want the best for the game in the country. They support the Socceroos. They go to Socceroos games. They go to Matilda's games. I don't think there's any apathy from that point of view, but to just gain the insight and just hear about so much of the knowledge that they have from their time watching South Melbourne Hellas is just so insightful, and I learned a lot from it. And I think a lot of people on Twitter did as well, as there was a bit of a discussion about it, which is fantastic to see, and I think provides obviously a great platform for ourselves at Green and Gold FC. So, any final thoughts, boys, before we head into a bit more of the professional discussion regarding the Isuzu A-League?
No, not really. It's just good to hear from well, we hear from A-League fans so much on social media. It's good to hear from people that are more invested in the local game than most. So yeah, hopefully that's something we can appeal to going forward in terms of the national second division. So a lot to be excited about going forward for Australian football, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we can definitely talk about the national second tier a little bit, as we should be expecting some announcements soon on that. But just diverting our discussion a little bit to the A League. I'm used to saying Isuzu Ute because of the the work I do for the collective, of course, on radio. But Auckland FC, they just continue to go from strength to strength. It's really admirable, and I'd say largely unsurprising. Of course, they did have the break. They haven't played a game in about 2 weeks at this point in time, in which they defeated MacArthur in the first expansion derby of the week last week. But they've been a very huge surprise hit with immensely strong crowds, fantastic coaching appointments, and great players on the park. They've also got a cafe in Auckland as well. Strong identity. Bill Foley has really imprinted his mojo on that football club. I'll start with you, Graham. I mean, why is this expansion team just working to an absolute T, whilst I guess you could say for MacArthur and Western United that they are struggling very much so in some departments?
Well, it shows just how difference it makes if your start is really, really good when you're starting a franchise. This is the second franchise Auckland has started, and we're talking about 10,000 differences in the number of people which are coming, average attendance roughly, compared to Auckland version 1 and Auckland version 2. So same region, same town, I think almost even the same name, certainly the same nickname. So it's kind of amazing that if you don't start good, it's very, very difficult to recover. We know Western Sydney Wanderers, they consulted the fans about the club colours, the name of the club, and it really felt like it was something representing the identity of the Western Sydney Wanderers community. And there's been a lot more effort put into this Auckland FC. Western United, they were playing in a stadium which was different from their catchment area. So that's really got them off to a bad start. MacArthur and Western have both had COVID very early in their starts. So I guess they just didn't hit the ground running, and it's so hard to catch back up.
Absolutely, and I think from my perspective regarding Auckland is that I think a lot of it stems from the ownership, especially Bill Foley owning AFC Bournemouth, and there's a very strong ownership structure involved within that football club, and I think just even extends to the social media coverage and how they've been able to harness such a huge following. It's not just on the field; it's off the field where they're thriving as well. I mean, which expansion teams can accumulate 51,000 followers on Instagram in just a matter of 12 months or so? It's truly remarkable, isn't it, Alex?
No, obviously, like, look, there's lots that you have to consider with football clubs these days. Obviously, you've got the off the pitch stuff being just as important as on the pitch, but Auckland have just hit the mark, just straight from the gun. They've hit the mark in every single department. On the pitch, I've said this numerous times on my YouTube channel and on social media as well. I genuinely believe if you take out their entire attack, they have the best team in the league. In terms of their defensive midfield pairing, it's the best in the league, in my opinion. Their defense is the best in the league. They have the best goalkeeper in the league. Corica, you've got an experienced coach who knows the A-League like the back of his hand. And you've got Bill Foley, who isn't just one of these checkbook owners that's just going to throw everything around there. He actually looks like, he's got the right people in. They've done their research. They built the exact kind of squad that they want to build. You look at some of the other, even high-tier A-League teams with their squad building and how so many of them have got it wrong, on a number of occasions. Even, when you consider some of the marquee signings that don't work out most of the time, Auckland have just hit every single metric that I think I didn't even expect them to, do this well. I thought they were going to do good. Don't get me wrong, but they have gone so much further than I think any of us would have expected. And look, you've got to give credit to especially their fan base as well. They've gotten behind this team from the first game week. The stadium has been packed. It's been really good. The social media work has been good. it's just the great vibes around the club overall. And I think that's probably got to do with a large portion of why they're doing so well at the moment.
Of course, an average attendance of 16,875 is the best in the competition, just above Sydney FC, who've got, I think, just over 200 fans less on average to their games. Of course, they can't exactly pack it out for the marquee fixture against Wellington because obviously, the stadium's not as big as the ones that we do have in Australia. But I think from my perspective, I look at purposeful appointments and I take it as someone that I guess has some experience within the commercial world. I look at the appointment of Nick Becker as one that is just incredible. He had a very senior leadership role at Melbourne City, and one thing that what I heard when he was at Melbourne City was that he had such an inextricable and close relationship with the fans. He understood how the fans operated and what was best for the supporters at that football club. And Melbourne City's not a huge club in terms of its supporter base, but he treated those fans correctly. The fan interactions that he's had with numerous members was incredible, and I think that's really extended to the way that he's started to hire those within the organization from a footballing and also media perspective, communications perspective, merchandise perspective. They've got a bloody cafe there, man. That's branded in Auckland colours. That's incredible. I mean,
They've got their own personal beach there now as well.
yeah, legitimately, it's incredible. They've also got udders as well in the Source udders, as we saw in round one, whatever it was, when they had their first home game. So I genuinely think it's been an incredible masterstroke from, I guess, the APL to get themselves involved at the end of the day. And I think fundamentally speaking, they've not put a single foot wrong in any domain whatsoever. And I think it has to be praised to the fullest extent. But also, the players they've brought in, I have to say, a lot of them come from New Zealand National League. You could look at guys like Gillian. Francis de Vries has had a career, that's for sure, and he's considered to be someone that's going to break into that New Zealand national team squad and be a force to be reckoned with. Logan Rogerson as well. And I just think they've done everything correctly, Alex. I mean, genuinely not put a single foot wrong.
No, but you're correct there in saying that they have, built a large portion of their squad from the, New Zealand local leagues, especially Auckland City. And there are those reports saying that there's Auckland trying to work a possible deal with FIFA to allow Auckland to actually, loan some players back for the purpose of the Club World Cup. But that aside, the fact that you've got a large portion of the squad being made up of professional footballers and they've come into the A-League and taken the league by storm is absolutely brilliant. Look, you've got some experienced guys there, sure, like Tommy Smith, obviously Hiroki Sakai, Estrada, Galagos in that midfield. But then you've got guys like Pinecker, guys like De Vries, guys like you said, Logan Rogerson and Liam Gillian. These are players that have had a massive impact. And, one that is maybe a bit of an unsung hero for Auckland, I'd say, is Liam Gillian. He's probably been, in my opinion, one of my most, I guess, underrated players in the A-League this season. He's so exciting to watch. I know Nadar Moreno's sort of, picked up his form a bit, so it's unlikely that we're going to see Gillian get that sort of starring role that he had at the start of the season. But there's just so much to be excited about with Auckland. With the way they play, their structure is great. They hold their shape really well, and they're not afraid to sort of hit on the counter or if they need to hold that ball and sort of play with it a bit more. They're just a great team to watch, man. And look, I take great pride in them being Gloria's only major scalp of the season. But look, they're a great team regardless. So they're going to do really good things. Honestly, I'm rooting for them to win the A-League this season, man. They've been just great to watch and everything.
Absolutely. So you have to say that they are on course to do so. Of course, their next fixture is very enticing. But I also want to bring another point to the discussion, Graham. I mean, news coming out today that they've actually just secured the services of FA former national head of performance, Luke Casserly, who's going to develop Auckland's under 21s team, which is going to be playing in the equivalent of the NPL in the New Zealand National League, which is just a fantastic appointment. But you can tell that they're trying to develop New Zealand football, which is a very intriguing thing. I speak to Wellington's means of trying to develop New Zealand football, and they've done an incredible job. I mean, look at Sarpreet Singh, Liberato Kakachi is being linked to Fenerbahce. So this next step to hire Luke Casserly really does pose the potential revolution of not just New Zealand players, but New Zealand football as a whole.
Yes, it does. And at least for me, it gives me a tear to cheer against for every week because I'm a very loyal Aussie. I'm not rooting for them to win the whole premiership. I'd say there's been roughly as many New Zealanders just from Wellington, which have made the Big Five, as there has been from the A-League in the past 20 years. And so that's a really interesting point that somehow New Zealand, the A-League has not interfered with New Zealand's development pathways, but has, if anything, enhanced them. But we haven't exactly at the moment seen the same, at least not yet. There might be some green shoots happening right now, but at least not yet. We haven't seen the same level of youth development in the A League.
Yes, precisely so. And I just have another question for you, Graham. I mean, you see the trajectory of Auckland and how that sort of improved the league's crowds. I mean, currently we sit at 9,281 as the average league attendance. If you look at last season, I'll just get it up at the moment. The average attendance for the 2023-24 season was 8,558. You have to say that this season, Auckland are really bumping that average up. And I would love to hear what the average crowd of the league is without them. So is this trajectory positive or worrying? I mean, we had a Sydney derby over the weekend, and that rated 158,000 Metro in Australia, which I think was about the 48th best program overnight on Saturday night, which isn't great on free to air. So where are we looking at the moment? Putting it bluntly, are we in a good spot? Are we in a terrible spot? What's going on?
So I answered the big picture question at the end, but first I want to give the numbers. I was expecting to give good news just based on the fact that crowds are a little bit higher on average, but it does look at best we plateaued, and we won't know until the end of the season. So I removed Derby crowds and I removed Unite round and looked at the first 18 rounds from last year compared to this year. Raw 500, Jets up 1,600 in their average, City home gains 60 up in their average, Western United 330, Macarthur 150, and Adelaide up 1,439. Finally, Sydney FC up 230. However, at the same time, Central Coast Mariners down 220. No surprise, less successful season. Victory, much more worrying, is down 1,300 if you remove their Derby days. City down 1,400. Western Sydney Wanderers down 2,740. So on all, the average is roughly down about 100 per club, a little bit over 100 per club. So we won't know until the end of the season whether we're improving or going down, but it looks like probably we're hitting a plateau. I was hoping we would recover much more since the end of COVID, but it doesn't look like this is happening just yet. And I was like, what is a barrier with crowds? Why are we not able to crack that mainstream when we're the highest participation sports? So I did a bit of soccernomics and I looked at crowds all around the world. And actually, what I found was surprising. So crowds are really, really well predicted by two things. How many people in your country play football is number one. So in Australia, that's a little bit over 1 million. We count participation numbers to include a lot more than people are playing. In England, it's about 14 million. In Italy, it's about 5 million. So it varies quite a lot from country to country. But that's number one, which predicts how big crowd number is. And number two, crowd numbers are predicted by the quality of the league. If you look at the value of players according to transfer market. And if we have a look at those two metrics, we're actually getting crowds twice as big as I expect if you look at the quality of the league. And we're getting crowds half as big as I expect, roughly, when I look at the number of people playing the game. So that's split the difference, and maybe we're actually not too far from where you expect. There might be some things we can do better, treat active support or whatever, but unless we find a way to improve the quality, it's going to be very, very difficult. Now, I love the quality, but it is a very, very expensive league. I don't really know how we do that. Normally what happens is if you're getting crowds this big, you're a profitable club, a profitable league. But for whatever reason, we can't invest the revenue we're getting from crowds this big into improving the league and into basically investing more money into players, which improves the crowds, more money into players, improves the crowd, and getting to that virtuous cycle. Because for whatever reason, I'm not really sure why this is, but for whatever reason, the costs are just astronomical. There is a shortcut, although it's a completely unethical one, but I do want to mention it, that most leagues around the world, including in Australia, have pokie machine revenue. Broncos get 12 million a year, Panthers about 60 million a year, Essendon 15 million, Carlton 20 million. If you added that revenue to every single club in the A-League, then it would be a much richer league. They wouldn't have deficits and they would grow. But thankfully, we don't have that. But it also means we have additional challenges in trying to grow this league and get crowd numbers to where they should be.
Yeah, it's a very interesting discussion, I think, regarding attendance and whatnot. And I think obviously with the broadcast distribution, the lowest it's ever been now due to the APL struggles and what have you. I think it's really put clubs in a position where, well, they've had to consider their revenue streams, and the way to enter the revenue stream is by, I guess, to happy accident, develop players through your academy. And MacArthur have been the biggest demonstration of that. I mean, they've sold 3 players over the January transfer window, and going to be brutally honest, a very average one in 2 very average ones in the face of both Oliver Jones and Arieth Piol, who didn't really do much in the league for the 2 seasons that they were playing senior football. So, and you look at Sydney FC, Alex Bomjohan obviously bringing in both players, but also exporting players as well, and Hayden Matthews going to Portsmouth for $2 million Australian. So I think it's a tremendous shift at the moment, but I think how's that linked to attendances? It's sort of, you have to mitigate risk and find that, balance that can align with, I guess, the values of both footballing endeavors, but also commercial endeavors. Because these clubs are at the end of the day, they're franchises, they're businesses, and to make a profit in the A-League is a near impossible task. I mean, Melbourne Victory used to post profits of 6-figure profits a few years ago, well, 10 years ago, not quite a few years ago, and now they lost $9.7 million in the most recent financial year, which is just, yeah, it's just such a vicious cycle, as one would call it. But I guess from your perspective, the last point of mode of discussion, I guess, to ask you, Alex, where do you feel as if the trajectory of the league goes from this point forward? Is it a case of the dip in quality of the league is supplemented by the fact that young players are getting more minutes? What happens here now? How can Australian clubs maximize revenue streams and by in turn just get more fans in the gates? Because you have a Sydney derby getting 32,000, and then another match is another Sydney FC home game. It's 13,000, 10,000. So is it just a big ticket item, or how do we encourage loyalty? I know it's an age-old discussion we've had, but there you go.
Look, it's a tough one, right? The league's not in a good position right now in terms of financially. It hasn't been for a long time. I don't think it will be for a while. The smartest thing that the league can do, in my mind, is become sort of a selling league, promote a lot of these Aussie youngsters and just try and really build them up and sell them onto Europe for profit. That's how they're going to become financially sustainable. But to do that, you also need to fix the domestic transfer system. You need to get all that sorted, and you need to promote these Aussie clubs taking risks on younger players by giving them 4 or 5-year deals, so that you're not losing players on a free, like Perth Glory are about to do with Jalen Pearman, who's probably our most promising player that we've had come out of the academy since, Jacob Italiano. But look, aside from that, it's hard to encourage loyalty without creating rivalry among a great deal of teams. Unless you have situations where you have one club states, with Western Australia having Perth and South Australia having Adelaide, the only other real instances I can think of sort of diehard loyalty to a club is when you do create those sort of big rivalries. You got your Sydney and your Western Sydney, you're getting your Auckland and your Wellington. And to be honest, I have been a criticizer in recent years of Wellington not necessarily having, I guess, the greatest support, but I really feel like it's starting to come. It's back on the up now that Auckland is back in, and there is that sense of rivalry, which is a good sign. I do think that you do need to hit more big markets with the A-League. I feel like Gold Coast is a market that you do need to try and hit again, and properly this time, without having Clive Palmer as the owner of your football club.
Mhm.
There are other untapped areas. For example, I feel like MacArthur and Western United, while there did need to be another New South Wales and Melbourne team, in my opinion, I feel like the whole problem with them isn't down to location per se. I think it's more just down to the fact that they didn't market those clubs right at all. First of all, MacArthur is nowhere near a big enough area for you to justify having a MacArthur-based, A-League side. And I'd honestly have to say the same with clubs like Newcastle, maybe even clubs like the Central Coast. They're just not big enough markets, in my opinion. You can make an argument for Western United, but Western United, my main problem with that is west of what? What are you? You got Western Sydney, but they're the Western Sydney Wanderers. You know what I mean? They've got identity. They're really building off of that whole sort of divide or cultural divide between, the Western Sydney suburbs and the actual Sydney CBD, which is good. That's why the fan bases are so passionate. That's why they pack out, Allianz or Combank anytime they play each other. But, if you made it Geelong United or West Melbourne United, you probably would be doing a lot better. I personally would have just put South Melbourne in and tried to bank on that, and put in Wollongong Wolves and tried to bank on that, rather than making a MacArthur or a Western United expansion team. But look, that's besides the point. I really feel like if the league is going to be financially viable going forward, you do need to get that sort of consistent fan base going in. You're going to create that by having big rivalries and by encouraging these fans to stick around. And the way you're going to do that, in my opinion, is by getting these younger players on long-term deals. By doing that, you're not going to have players switching back and forth between clubs as often. And by getting the domestic transfer system, you're not going to have players that still have 2 years left on their deal mutually terminating a contract just to go somewhere else. I have a mate who used to watch the A-League religiously back in the day, and he's not watched it for years now. And his one main reason is that there's no loyalty in the league. There's way too many players that just recycle through clubs. And look, I forgot who I heard this from. I think it might have been Alex Grant, but he said that it's not just Australia where you get these players that go in between clubs. It's a thing in Asia as well. There's players that have played for many Chinese clubs or many Japanese clubs or Korean clubs. But in Australia, I feel like this is much more of a pronounced issue. You really do need to have more loyalty in your league. You need to have a proper domestic transfer system that is going to encourage these clubs to develop youngsters. And you do need sort of, I guess, focus more, in my opinion, on bringing in Socceroos quality players. I don't want to see as many of these visa signings coming in where they're just random guys that we're pulling out of the second division of Austria or something like that. Like, there's no excuse as to why we shouldn't be able to get, Aussie players back into the A-League and why we couldn't market to them a lot more. But that's personally my take. I have a feeling that there'll probably be some out there that disagree with me in some of the things that I've said, but I feel like that's a generally sensible position to hold at the moment.
I think my sort of gripe, well, I would say it's a gripe, but my sort of means of frustration with the APL. I mean, I'm not sure people really pay attention to my Twitter activity, but I don't really tweet about the league anymore. But it comes to a point of where I think I come from the view and perspective of this is very much a selling league, and the market is clearly undervalued in Australia. Overseas clubs utilize that. They have an abundance of data, but it's at the point of what is the identity of this football competition? What is the identity of this league? How can we help curate it in a way where clubs are now mature enough to market to a wider demographic? I think some clubs have it, some clubs don't. I mean, I look at Melbourne Victory from a Victorian perspective. What does it mean to be Victorian anymore? What does it mean to be a Melbourne Victory supporter? I think a lot of that has been lost from Melbourne Victory perspective, but that's just often performance based. And we can go into a myriad of problems and issues. I know, Alex, you touched on the MacArthur and Western United dilemma. I think from a footballing perspective, both have succeeded. They've both won trophies. Western United, I think their facility out in Tarneet is superb. They've been around for 5 years now, and they've got more land owned than the Melbourne Victory do. So I think that really comes to the fore. Look at all the academies across the country. The Wanderers have their own facility. The Mariners have their own facility. Sydney FC have their own facility. Sky Park is a fantastic ground, as I understand. Melbourne City as well. And I think the Perth Glory are building their own facility, if I'm right in saying.
Yeah, we've got our own facility out in Mirrabooka now. It's not the most shiny suburb of all, but
Yeah,
it works, I guess.
it's there. It's in one place. And you have Victory's academies currently playing out of Darebin, the home of the Matildas, as this podcast is being literally recorded whilst Melbourne Victory's NPL side are playing their first match in just about 9 years in the NPL against the Altona Magic. So everything's so splintered. And I just think that it comes to a point of identity. And that's where I think Western United have succeeded. As for MacArthur, I don't know as of yet. I'm not a Sydney sider, so I can't really speak to it. But all I know is that their youth sides are actually in the second division of New South Wales football, which is a problem. It's a problem, but they also in turn pick up a lot of players from NPL sides and develop them into overseas commodities. Oliver Jones played for Hakoah Sydney City East. I'm not trying to be biased here. We're not the strongest club in terms of developing senior players. Actually, I take that back. We developed Zach Sapsford, but you wouldn't think that Oliver Jones would be sold for $400,000 Australian dollars a few years ago, would you? But MacArthur clearly have that intuition to go into the market and have that selling nature, and that's a huge testament to what they've done over the years. So, I mean, I think the question of were they mistakes is one thing, but I think they're having a tangible impact on the positivity around, I guess, young players at the moment. Graham.
Yeah, and just to touch on what Alex said before about us becoming a selling league, it is one real silver lining that this time when the A-League has gone through its most difficult time financially is also a time where the youth really do seem to be improving a bit, whether that's due to A-League academies, national curriculum bearing fruit, or some combination of the two, I don't know. And so that means that the drop has not been too much. There's, if anything, there was a noticeable drop in quality from the first 5 rounds or so of this A-League compared to previous. But I think right now it feels like just any other season. And they've been able to develop players and make a lot of money that way. Yeah, there needs to be some way to make these clubs profitable with 8,000, because most clubs getting without a level of quality around the world, they are essentially able to basically grow the league and grow the game. I think to fully max out the transfer market and the development of youth, we need to, on the A-League level, I think we need to get rid of the salary cap, maybe replace it with a luxury tax. That will also be more compatible with the domestic transfer system and allow for more flexible, longer term contracts, as well as keeping players to be loyal and give that club an identity. And we also need to find a way to have a domestic transfer system which rewards lower clubs to develop better players. Because as you say, Ollie Jones worth 400 grand. He wasn't worth that much probably when he was playing in the NPL. Just a few months playing in the A-League and his money skyrockets, and some of that money should trickle down.
Oh, it definitely is. Do not worry. We get solidarity payments on the way.
How much, you know?
I don't know, actually. I hope so.
But on top of the solidarity payments, add domestic transfer system payments as well. Yes, that's an additional cost to the A-League, but in the long term, that means that lower leagues more incentives to produce better players, which actually in the long term benefits the A-League. And then the final point which you touched on was identity. I can only speak to my own experience as a Raw fan, and I know that football is different to other codes, but the identity of the other Brisbane club I really follow, the Brisbane Broncos, they are the Queensland club. You know, more than half of their starting 13 is always a Queenslander. And so they're the ones which you think if they win, Queensland wins. And they've still managed to keep that. And I really go into their history, and really whenever there's a flood or some disaster that's happening, they're always speaking and probably pretending to volunteer and help out or whatever. And at Brisbane Raw, I think like there's so few Queensland players that play for them that it just feels like this is a franchise with Queensland painted onto them. Now I understand that in football you often have people from all over the world playing for your club. That's fine. But it would be nice if they lent into their Queensland identity a lot more. Queensland is such a parochial state. We want to feel like Queensland's facing whoever we're beating. And that can remain true if it's a Brisbane club, even if there's a Gold Coast or North Queensland club.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of led into my sort of whole thing about Melbourne Victory. And I look at the side at the moment, and this is going to be a very controversial statement. And I'm not one to sort of come up with huge hot takes, but Victory is in terms of its academy across the board, out of the three clubs, it's the worst at the moment. And they're NPL 1. But when it comes to the players that they have brought through to the first team, there's not much you can really speak of in recent seasons. Casey Boss is a unique scenario because he actually moved across to Melbourne Victory because he's based in Hoppers Crossing, and the drive to Casey is a bit too much. While when City moved their base of their academy elsewhere, and I'd say this as they're drawing 1-1 with Altona Magic, they should be probably 2-0 up. But what does it mean to be a part of Melbourne Victory, to have Victorian players? I look at the squad. There is a grand total of, I can count one starting player in the lineup that is a that is a Victorian. Nishan Velupile is another one. But I look at the signing like Fabian Monge, and I know I'm being picky here, but Fabian Monge is a player from Apia Leica. Why can't you look at someone from another club in Victoria and say, "Ooh, we can put him on a scholarship deal and give him minutes"? And I know talent scout, but from my perspective, I just think the talent's there. And as you mentioned, when you do have a lot of Queenslander players that aren't really from Queensland, it's a bit difficult. I guess that's why the fan base really got around Thomas Waddingham, because he was a Queenslander, Cairns boy. Beautiful story, really was. And he's obviously gone up to the big smoke in England. So that identity question has to be established. And I think it's also a very unique marketing angle, which I guess leads into the next point of discussion. The National Premier Leagues in Victoria and New South Wales commenced over the weekend. I'm pretty sure those are the only two states where they commenced, unless I'm wrong. But it was a fantastic weekend of football. I'm personally delighted to to have gone to one game, went to the Port Melbourne Sharks versus the South Melbourne game on the Friday, which helped kick off the season. And we have an 2025 NPL attendance and viewers thread on Green and Gold FC. So you can check that out. There's a lot of discussion around that. And I think someone has collated the streaming averages from last season across basically all the NPL leagues, which is crazy doing. Well done, Happy Goose. But I guess a question for both of you, I guess having the NPLs hasn't started yet, but do you just feel with the second division there's a bit more hype around it? I feel it here. It's tangible. You can see it in the attendance and viewing figures. But Alex, what are your thoughts?
I'm definitely hyped up for the second division. And to be honest, I'm really surprised at how many young people that I'm actually seeing getting excited. And look, it's kind of a bit sad at times because a lot of them are just excited because now they think they're going to have a chance to go pro. And to be honest, while I do think that it is going to be much, much better for Australia's whole youth production and, stuff like that to actually have a national second division that we are able to sort of realistically put good financial investment into. I want to see people getting excited because of the quality of football that we're going to see, not necessarily because of, a number of those kinds of factors. But I am absolutely buzzing for it. I can't wait for it to be a full league format. I know a lot of people were disappointed at the prospect of it being more of a Champions League style format until it does get sorted out. But once we do get a proper league format going and we get a bunch of these sort of clubs that are realistically able to challenge A-League clubs, whether that be in the Australia Cup every year or whether that be just in a consistent league format. And hopefully we do have promotion relegation by 2030, considering that's when they're hoping of having it by. I really am excited to see it. Just to touch on your point previously about sort of what does it mean to be a Victorian, it sort of reminds me a lot what's going on in WA and a lot of the complaints that we've been having here around the Perth Glory. Now, look, we signed 3 players from the New South Wales NPL, that being Abdullah Faisal, Nathaniel Blair, and Adam Bagaria, all 3 of which great young players with heaps of potential. But we signed all 3 of those on pro deals, and because of that, we neglected giving Jalen Pearman a professional deal. And as we now know, he tore the A-League by a storm in his first few games and now has signed a pre-contract agreement with QPR. So West versus Rest has sort of been a big ideological thing, I guess, in Western Australia when it is in terms of our football. We've always done really well at promoting young WA talent, but I don't think that the Glory have done a good enough job in recent years on capitalizing on that. Jalen Pearman, for one example, Daniel Benny also leaving to QPR on a scholarship deal. Jacob Italiano, thankfully, we managed to get a bit more coin for when he went to Borussia Mönchengladbach, but he only left when he was, around the age of 17 years old. And then you've got other players like Alessandro Cacciati, who we lost for free to Parma, didn't even get anything for him because he wasn't even on a scholarship deal at that time. So there are a lot of these sort of players that I really wish that the Glory would focus on more. But look, back to your point on the national second tier, it is going to be absolutely brilliant. I'm so excited. I'm really, really looking forward, like I said, to when it gets to a full league format. I think that's going to benefit, I guess, the whole structure of Australian football a lot more. And I guess really, really put pressure on these, I guess, inactive owners that aren't taking as much pride in seeing their teams performing well when there is a real risk of relegation and real bad financial loss and even loss of, potential viewership money and fan base and everything like that. It's going to be a real big step forward for Australian football in my eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess from your perspective, Graham, I mean, from a Queenslander point of view, I mean, I saw Gold Coast Knights as like the NPL super team in Queensland last season. The squad that they assembled was utterly ridiculous. I think they've lost 3 players to Hume City, which is crazy. I think Joel Russell, Joffrey Dembele, and Aaron Reardon have signed for Hume City, and I think Xander Guy went to Preston. So it's been some situation there. But I guess from your point of view, Queenslander perspective, it seems that those issues with the federation have seemingly been smoothed over. So we'll have a Queensland representative in the national second tier at the end of the season. Is the hype brewing down there?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, because it really depends on how they go. So if they manage to lean into that Queensland identity and fill the space which the Roar aren't, it's going to be very different because even if it's lower quality, like of course it's second tier, if I care who wins, then that matters. I'm probably still going to watch both Raw and the Gold Coast. But if they're the ones who's like, oh, nearly every single person in the squad is Queensland, some Socceroos who are Queenslanders have come through the Gold Coast and now playing, then I'm going to care who wins. And that makes such a difference when following a football match. So, but then again, it could be a win-win where maybe both clubs, there's a rocket goes up Brisbane Roar and how they run their club. And they're like, oh, we better become the Queensland club. And then they start to lean into their identity. So that would be great. I love what Alex said about like, there's a lot of kids now thinking we can be professional footballers now. We've had a real leaky pipeline. I've heard so many people, including Graham Arnold, say we are technically just as good as any other nation until you hit about 14 years old. And then people start leaving the game just en masse and we fall off a cliff. And I don't know, though, I'm not qualified to comment on whether that's the case. The one young tournament where you had really 15-year-olds and really, really young people playing in Europe in that tournament, I think it was last year. It did look like that. And so that'd be great if that's true. But the second tier, even in its Champions League format, it seems to be ending, well, not ending, but like doing at least something about this leaky pipeline we have of so many people leaving the game so young. And I just wonder if we're going to see benefits from the national second tier sooner than we think. So that's something which really, really excites me. I was wrong. I've been very negative about the Champions League's format, but from the reaction, I think I was wrong to be that negative. I think it looks really, really positive. A lot of the clubs which were not in the RFP phase in the first time seem to have gotten excited about it after initial negative reaction and seem to be submitting expressions of interest. And we might get to a full home and away league sooner than I originally thought. I thought this was a way of burying the second tier, but it looks like actually the second tier could grow and it could really put pressure on the tier above it. And one big game changer, just want to look at the big picture. As much as we complain this episode about MacArthur and Western United not starting really, really well, one big game changer, I think, is that their crowds are as big as I think probably smaller than the best second tier crowds will be. We don't have the same situation of the MLS where there's such a big gap between the crowds of the MLS and the second tier. I think there will be some overlap. And so that makes promotion relegation much stronger, I think, in Australia than it would be in America, where you think, oh, well, this is sure is good ideologically or whatever, however people might rebut it, but you got to look at the finances. Whereas here, you say, okay, if Preston gets like 4K or South Melbourne get 4K or whatever, who knows what crowds they get. But if it's over 4K and you have two clubs in the A-League getting less than 4K on average, then it's harder to make the case that we should not have at least some managed steps towards promotion relegation. I know there's probably going to be some big concerns about the viability of some of these clubs because they have shallower roots in some of these historic clubs. So I do get that. And I do think that we do need to be pragmatic. But if the national second tier does have some big clubs, then I think it's going to be very hard to argue against at least some managed level of promotion relegation.
Yeah, absolutely so. And I think from my perspective, I mean, for those who don't know, I do a little bit of work here and there for South and the best NPL media man to ever exist, George Morales. And just to see the tangible impact that I think South Melbourne have had on, maybe I'm just leaning into the hype a little bit, but the tangible impact that South Melbourne have had upon its community in preseason at the very least, that sort of leaning back into the "This is Hellas" moniker, which I think is maybe going to attract some lapsed fans. And I think one interesting thing to acknowledge when it comes to the second tier and I think the NPL as a whole is that currently the seasons operate within winter, obviously within a February to September timeline, which is just a bit longer than the AFL season. And with the second tier occurring in summer, those community teams won't be in action. So previously, if let's say Johnny from Melbourne City wouldn't be able to watch South Melbourne on the weekend, now he can because he's not in season. So I think there's a lot of scope for clubs like South Melbourne, who will be the only Victorian team that has a Greek background, unless Oakley Cannons make the second tier or Heidelberg United. They should have realistically the market share, to be honest, unless you're a Heidelberg fan. Sorry, Oakley, but I think that a lot of Oakley supporters will go watch South Melbourne. But I think that's an intriguing thing. But it also provides a lot of nightmares for these clubs as well. To how do you frame your marketing around the second tier? Hopefully, we get some more clarification surrounding that. But looking at the crowds this past weekend, Preston pulled in what we believe is around 3,500 to 4,000. Port Melbourne Sharks, a very mid-market team in the NPL Victoria, pulled around 1.5 to 2,000. Granted, it was against South Melbourne, but still a fantastic crowd at that. Dandenong Thunder pulled an awesome crowd against Green Gully. In Sydney, there was some pretty good crowds across the competition as well. RPA looked like they pulled a pretty decent crowd. Sydney Olympic, obviously back at Belmore, doing a pretty good job. But boys, just from your angle and your perspective, how do you make people care about this?
I really think you do need to market it as sort of, I guess, a new beginning for Australian football. Because you do have a lot of these old heritage clubs. And like we've been talking about, you do have a lot of those, I guess, migrant communities that you're really going to want to have to tap into for this second division. I get that with the A-League, the APL sort of wanted to move away from a lot of that ethnic sort of based clubs where you don't really want to have a club that's existing at the top level that's solely based off of Greek heritage or solely based off of Italian heritage or Macedonian heritage or Turkish or Croatian or Serbian or anything like that. But this is a market that I feel has been really, really excluded since the A-League has come into effect. And we discussed this on the last episode in terms of how, a lot of Italian football fans in Perth and I guess a lot of Greek football fans over in Melbourne have really been not necessarily vilified, but I guess sort of looked down upon by the powers that be in the APL as sort of, not wanting to tap into those historical things because they wanted to, whether they wanted to be a game for everyone or whether they wanted to just be more marketable or take out, the risk for, I guess, ethnic based conflict. I think it's damaged the progression of the league. And look, like we discussed on the South Melbourne episode, yes, you have clubs that are based in these cultures, but it doesn't make them any less inclusive. You've got Italian-based clubs in Perth that are just as inclusive as any English clubs or any whatever clubs, and every club is going to have their origins. I think we need to respect that, and I think the APL need to respect that a lot more. We need to respect the origins of a lot of these historic clubs, and we can do that by actually, advertising that, hey, this is a Greek club. We are proud of our heritage, or this is an Italian club. We are proud of our heritage. And I think we're taking steps to doing that. Dandenong, obviously, adding their whole Hajduk thing back to their
Yeah. That's
putting,
huge. Yeah.
putting that in. Adelaide City now adding the Italian flag back to their logo. There's many clubs in WA that are now starting to add their ethnic heritage back to their logos and to their marketing and stuff like that. That's something that's going to be huge if the national second division is going to be a thing. I don't think there has to be too much concern around, oh, well, there's going to be this ethnic group and that ethnic group. Man, just let people enjoy their ethnicity. Let people enjoy their culture. Let people enjoy their historic football clubs that are now going to be, I guess, given a fair run at the top level. That's what I think is going to be needed if you are going to make the national second division a success. So hopefully the APL don't, cow it out of it. Hopefully they don't go with this whole bullcrap again of, oh, yes, you can be South Melbourne, but you can't be, such a Greek club. You have to be more inclusive. Oh, you can be Dandenong, but you can't be Dandenong Hajduk. Oh, you can be Adelaide City, but you're going to need to take that Italian flag out of the name or out of the badge. It's something that I think is going to need to be touched on getting closer to, I guess, the inception of a full league format.
Yeah, and I think from my angle, I think the clubs are also very much embracing their own community itself. The South Melbourne doesn't just cover the Greek population of Melbourne. I'm an Australian that lives in a certain area of Southeast Melbourne, and South Melbourne happens to be the closest club to me. I'm not of Greek heritage, but you do feel a connection towards these clubs as a whole. Naturally, that's just a naturally occurring thing of events. So I think there is a commercial appetite to the national second tier, branded under Football Australia branding, that can sort of lend itself and lend weight to the fact that if I am from someone that lives in, for example, I'm trying to think of a Sydney suburb, is Marconi based in Fairfield in Sydney? I think it's around there. Wherever Marconi's based, if I'm someone that lives in an area, I might not necessarily be of Italian background. Okay, there's a semi-professional football league that's being broadcasted on television here, or it's of a higher professional standard. It's being marketed in a way where you feel it's got national significance, which it does. It's a national competition. Well, then obviously that's going to provide a level of attractiveness. Councils will buy in. It's going to be a community aspect, not just for the city itself, but also just the community around it and the ecosystem surrounding it. And that's what's going to be important. But I guess from a Queenslander perspective, Graham, I mean, one team gets in, obviously with the second tier orientated around the fact that if a A-League youth side finishes perhaps first in the Queensland NPL, which I don't think will happen, they'll go in. So do you foresee a situation where maybe a club that doesn't quite have the requisite supporter base gets in the second tier, and that maybe might reflect poorly on Queensland football if there's not that attendance or viewership that is desired in the second tier?
Well, this is a whole interesting thing about promotion relegation. You do get some small clubs getting promoted. That is true. And in the short term, you don't get the optimal clubs going up. You're never going to have the optimal clubs in a tier at the same time. However, what happens is when teams get promoted, they gain bandwagon supporters, and some of those stay when the team gets relegated again. And so clubs, okay, they go up and they're a tiny club. They don't have the fan base to support themselves in the second tier, and they end up getting relegated. They might keep, say, a quarter of that fan base, and then that can be a consistent fan base, which can be an extra revenue stream and help them get back up again. And then if they get relegated again, they keep some of that fan base again, and so on, and then you grow. And so it doesn't matter that much in the long term if the wrong club or so forth gets promoted, because that is how promotion relegation work. You even see this effect. I call it the slingshot effect. It's found in a paper on promotion relegation. You even see this in the NSL in their ad hoc system. If a club was relegated and then promoted the following year, they end up with an average of roughly 1,000 more the year that they got promoted than they did before. So you gain more from promotion than you lose from relegation. And so this is a way that football can build over time. You can have more and more clubs picking up these bandwagon supporters and getting a small fraction of them as loyal supporters. And so over decades, eventually you have a strong collection of clubs which are strong enough to just compete at a higher and higher level. I want to go on to the point about the ethnic or migrant identity of some of these clubs. I'm really, really curious about how that plays out. We've seen Preston be able to lean into their migrant identity and get bigger crowds than A-League communities did. And I wonder if the situation's very different to what it was 20 years ago when there's such concern about ethnic communities. Soccer doesn't seem to be as stigmatized as it was back then. And also, I remember seeing this interview on The World Game about someone complaining about going to a club and seeing folk dancing. And I just think, like, I'm an Anglo myself, and it seems like Australia these days, your typical Anglo probably isn't going to act like a vampire reacts to holy water every time they see a souvlaki. I think things have changed a bit. And if I saw folk dancing, I mean, that's a date night. Like I prefer that to cheerleaders, you know. It doesn't seem like that would be as big a deal now. But the other fact which has changed is a material factor. To get on TV back then, when there's only 5 free-to-air channels and they had no secondary channels, you had to really, really meet a certain threshold. And so the A-League went for the Super Rugby format, and they really tried to meet that threshold to be good enough, at least for Foxtel, and hopefully aim to get at least one game on free-to-air TV. And that's a real struggle. These days, every single channel has lots and lots of channels going at the same time. There's online streaming, there's paid platforms. You can even put things on YouTube if all else fails. And so there isn't that minimum threshold to get visible anymore. So even if it does become a problem, as long as these clubs can run, there's no reason to put a cap on people's ambitions anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is unwavering ambition from everyone within the footballing pyramid, and I look at the YouTube numbers for Melbourne Victory Youth side playing against Altona Magic, 2,000 live viewers. You know, like that's impressive. You know, I'm not gonna lie, and even across the round, 18,000 for Preston versus Hume City. Excluding Preston's own socials numbers, Oakley versus Avondale, 11,000. Port Melbourne versus South Melbourne, 14,000, and the opener 17,000. In NPL New South Wales, it was similar. Of course, the league is not as good as Victoria, no bias, but 7,200 for Marconi versus Blacktown City, 6,500 for Rockdale and St George, and aside from that, more or less around the same figures. But I guess, well, I'll ask you, Graham, again, I guess now that we're on the topic of the footballing pyramid, with the second division coming into play, how could Auckland City or other various New Zealand clubs be integrated within that competition potentially, Graham. I mean, Auckland City have produced several players that are playing professionally at the moment, and Cam Howison, I believe, is doing really well for Auckland, or is involved at the club in some way. So I guess how could this be an avenue potentially for them to get the football pyramid in Australia, or maybe just play in the Oceania Professional League? I don't know. Up to them.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to embrace the spirit of Marie Kondo. I love mess. We just have to deal with the mess because we're going to have there's a lot of issues with moving towards a full pyramid. We've got this Oceania Professional League. We have A-League clubs from 2 different countries, and we're going to have to figure out how to tie that in with 2 different pyramids. A lot of these A-League clubs don't have deep roots, unlike these historic clubs. So even though they can get crowds which are bigger than the average crowds from most NSL clubs, they don't have deep roots. And so it is a legitimate concern. Would they die in the NPL? I think they'll survive in the NST, and they might even become stronger in the NST if you have that slingshot effect of them getting relegated and promoted again. It might even be a way to grow these clubs. But if they get relegated twice, then you could lose a Melbourne Victory, you could lose a Sydney FC, and lose a club which is capable of drawing 15,000 crowd averages, even now on the low point there, still getting 13, 14,000 even outside of derbies. And so we've created a mess. And I know some people, including friend of the show, South Melbourne Mike, would probably rather just start again and just have a revolution. But you look at the history of revolutions, and sometimes it works out right, but a lot of times it works out wrong. We could just as easily have the governing bodies go even more conservative and be even further away from a football pyramid after the sting of top level football dying again in Australia. So who knows if that would even get you to a proper outcome, as well as losing all the investment from these A-League clubs over 20 years. For all the negative externalities of that, there still is those investments. So how do we deal with the New Zealand system? How do we deal with the Australian system and the complete mess we create? I don't know. We're probably going to have some strange compromises and hybrid systems along the way, like maybe some strange rules where Australian clubs can get relegated, but not New Zealand ones. Some A-League clubs can only get relegated to the second tier with maybe a time frame where they have to meet certain criteria to build deeper roots so they can survive a further drop down or something like that. Or if they don't, they get relegated anyway by the time the clock ends. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just spitballing here. It's going to be difficult, and because it's difficult, I can see there's going to be a lot of political resistance as well.
And from your perspective, Alex, Graham, with a very, very good summation and posited a lot of theories and queries. Your reply, and I guess reply to the original questions as well.
Look, I might be, passing off as more of a pessimistic person here. Will we ever see an Auckland City or New Zealand clubs in the national sector? I personally don't think we will. I think that the Oceanic Football League is much more of an upside for the overall good of Oceanic football, especially a lot of the small island nations. They're really going to be banking hard on New Zealand actually being a part of that. Can you make it work? I think possibly you can. Look, I've been a big advocate that once we do get promotion relegation between the first division and the national second tier, you do need to have a way to connect that to the actual, state NPL leagues. And the way that I think you do that is you keep the Champions League format, but you have the first division and the second division, home and away, full league format. And at the end of every season, you do have relegation promotion playoffs. And the way clubs can qualify for those will be through that Champions League format that we were talking about that takes place at the end of the season. And then you only have promotion relegation with that national second division side and maybe the winner of that sort of NPL Champions League. Maybe you can make an argument that you have one New Zealand team that can qualify for that Champions League format every year. Maybe you do get an Auckland City. Maybe there are cases where you do have 3 New Zealand teams in between both leagues. But I think that's the most realistic option that you can go for, really. I don't see a way where you can sort of just shoehorse Auckland City in there and just hope for the best, because I don't think that that's going to work. Look, let's not ignore that they do have deep coffers financially because of all of their recent appearances in the Club World Cup. It is a big financial booster for them, something that a lot of NPL sides will just not have access to. Would I like to see it? Absolutely. I've wanted to see Auckland City being able to compete with A-League sides for a long time now. And if you are going to make it work, I feel like we do need to find a way to connect the actual A-League, the National Second Division, and the NPL leagues below. That's the only possible way you're going to be able to make it work, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely valid. Absolutely so. I guess there's that question if what if Auckland FC or Wellington get relegated from the NST, but I think that's an unbelievable hypothetical that I don't think we'll ever see. Maybe they'll go back into the New Zealand National Leagues. I don't know. But other than that, boys, I think it was a very insightful discussion. Have any of you got any other points to sort of wrap us up?
Not really anything from me. It's been a good discussion, and thanks for hopping on, Neil and Graham, as always. I think a lot of good ground was covered today.
Absolutely so. Thank you so much, Graham, for your time as well. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. It's been a fantastic conversation, and don't forget to head over to greenandgoldfc.com and let us know your thoughts on this episode. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Just search Green and Gold FC. And if you enjoyed the episode a lot, be sure to follow, rate, and share the podcast. It really, really does help us out. That's all for today. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time, next week. Take care. And we really, really appreciate all your support, and more amazing podcasts coming very, very soon.